When we think about the traditional top-down decision making, it doesn't really acknowledge that the workplace has evolved drastically. Again, I harken back to the pandemic because what we saw in that moment are the norms that we thought were work, that, you had to be in a place at a set time, you do your work, you clock in and out, like that was flipped on its head.
You're listening to The Successful Bookkeeper with your host, Michael Palmer. Listen each week as inspiring guests share their secrets of success to help you increase your confidence, work smarter, and build a business you love. This episode of The Successful Bookkeeper is brought to you by PureBookkeeping.com, the proven system to grow your bookkeeping business.
Welcome back to the Successful Bookkeeper Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Palmer, and today's show is going to be a great one. Our guest is the founder of Future Forward Strategies, a firm specializing in labor market intelligence and strategy. Dr. Angela Jackson, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you so much, and thank you for having me.
It's great to have you. Labor is such an important piece of business, and it can be really challenging at the very simplest business. And so having someone who's spent a large part of their career analyzing it, gathering intelligence, is going to be very interesting to our listener. Before we get into all of that, I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about you, your journey, and how'd you end up doing what you're doing today?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for asking. I get asked that question a lot, and it's a two-part answer. The first answer is that, I grew up and was raised by my grandparents. My grandfather worked at a Chrysler factory. And this is back in the days where it was booming. And I remember when he came home one day and said that Lee Iacocca was going to be leading the Chrysler factory, and he was so excited. And it stayed with me because it showed me like what work can mean in one's life. And how it gives people purpose. And for me, I started researching and thinking about work at my earliest days, but then began studying it more formally later. So my career was a little bit windy, but I started in the private sector, working for Nokia and also Viacom, building new businesses domestically and internationally before transitioning to more impact-driven work at the intersection of workforce development, education, and business strategy. And so over the years, I've worked with Fortune 500 companies, startups, and policy organizations to develop strategies that create thriving workplaces. And at Harvard, my research that I lead at the Institute of the Future of Work is really around my new book, The Win-Win Workplace. And I focus on how organizations can align business success with employee well-being. And throughout my career, I've seen firsthand that companies that prioritize employee engagement outperform their competitors in revenue, retention, and innovation. And for me, just hearkening back to the story of my grandfather, I remember when he felt invested in by Chrysler, but I also remember when the Chrysler plant closed down in my community and what happened to people when they didn't have work that really centered on purpose in their lives.
I bet. I am a fan of the whole era and remember reading Lee Iacocca's biography or autobiography. I can't remember which one it was, but it's an interesting story. And yeah, those kinds of firms and auto industry, steel industry, the big ones, they're amazing until they're not.
Yeah.
And then they leave massive change in communities. So you've seen it all, from the good days to the bad days and hopefully back to the good days.
Well, that's exactly right, Michael. Like when I think about this opportunity, and you just started at the top of our conversation of saying what's happening in the world with labor, one thing that I'm very optimistic about in this moment is that with all of the political divide, one thing that there's consensus on is that we should be investing in workers so that workers can really show up as their best selves, do their job, and really add to business success. So I'm excited that this book, The Win-Win Workplace, is coming out in this moment because it's sharing ideas on what worker thriving looks like, but also that dotted line into the financial impact impacts on the business side when workers are thriving.
Absolutely. Now, this book and going through Harvard, I mean, that's a very, that's a big deal to go to Harvard, where I'm from, right?
Where I'm
And
from too, Michael.
yeah, I'm sure pretty much anywhere
Yes,
you're
I'm from
from,
small town Illinois, so it seems like a world away, and sometimes
for
I still
sure.
pinch myself.
Yes, I mean, that's remarkable. And even my son and his friends, he's 9 years old, and he's like, "Oh, I'm going to go to Harvard," and so that in itself is remarkable. How did you end up deciding to write a book about this?
So for me, when I started writing on this book project 3 years ago, it really started from a set of research that I led around an initiative called the Future of Work Grand Challenge. And this happened during the pandemic where we saw many people, literally overnight lose their jobs and were thinking about how do they transition to maybe new sectors or do something new. And I'm thinking a lot about the people who worked in hospitality and travel, a lot of frontline workers. And I led an initiative that invested in actually transitioning workers, 25,000 of them, into new careers. And as the people found new jobs, I followed them and I saw that there were a set of workers that were really thriving in that moment. And then there were another set that while they had the job, they were already looking for their next job. And so I got curious about the ones that were thriving, especially in this like unprecedented moment. And one thing I saw was it was really centered on the practices and support that these employers were providing to the workers. And as I got curious about it, when we think about these traditional like top-down decision making, one thing I saw with the companies where the employees were thriving was that they were centering the workers' voice, that some of the workers had a say in the benefits that they were experiencing and how they were working, the times that they were working. And what I really got curious about is that many of these companies, when I spoke to them, they would point me in the direction of saying, yeah, we don't see this as the nice thing to do. Like, this is actually driving our profitability. And so that
Hmm.
really started my journey to finding out, would this be true across more companies?
Interesting. And was there size of companies that were these large firms or medium? What did that look like?
Yeah, so the first set of research looked at 1,200 companies, and they were small, medium, and large size companies. Across all of the companies, we saw that, again, the 9 principles that you see in the Win Win Workplace book, when we saw those present, we saw a lift on the business side. So, looking at higher profitability, we saw that they had 18% higher productivity. And so we kept seeing these examples over and over again. And just last year, we repeated the research looking at Fortune 500 companies, and we studied 355 of those to see if we could replicate those findings. And again, we saw that companies that were thinking about investing in their workers and applying some of these strategies, they had a 23% higher profitability rate. And that's real dollars and cents. I always tip to companies that you see like Southwest Airlines, how, they're thriving through pushing decision-making power down to frontline employees. And what we're seeing with these companies that they're acknowledging that at all levels, that, their employees have an expertise based on their position in the company. And based on that expertise, they can offer insights on how to improve the business.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So this whole concept of traditional top-down decision making, maybe let's dig into a little bit of that. And it's nice to know that your research covers a portion of what many of our listeners, small firms, but also the firms that they deal with, small, medium size. A bookkeeper is going to deal with firms that are in that area. So this is very applicable. So when we talk about traditional top-down decision making, and that you're saying it's no longer effective in today's workforce, why is that?
Well, when we think about the traditional top-down decision making, it doesn't really acknowledge that the workplace has evolved drastically. Again, I harken back to the pandemic because what we saw in that moment are the norms that we thought were work, that, you had to be in a place at a set time, you do your work, you clock in and out, like that was flipped on its head. I
Mm,
remember being on Zoom and we saw our colleagues' children, people got really personal and talked about, maybe health challenges they were dealing with or that a family member was dealing with. I saw leaders and bosses having to have that same transparency, right? And so it was human to human. And so what I'm seeing now is that since that workplace has evolved, employees are really expecting that same transparency. They're expecting the same collaboration. And what they really want is specifically the next generation of workers is the ability to contribute meaningfully to the decisions that impact their work. And for small firms, I think that this becomes a competitive advantage for them versus large firms. Large firms are more hierarchical. They're matrix, right? There's many layers of management. But when you have a smaller company, you can actually bring people in. It becomes your competitive advantages when you're out, advertising for a job posting. You can say you have a chance to work shoulder to shoulder with the founder. You have a chance to share your ideas with management who can actually make a difference without all of the bureaucracy. That to me is going to be a differentiator when people are deciding where they want to work and share their talents.
hmm Absolutely. And so this has all been sort of put upside down on its head. I mean, COVID certainly accelerated that, but it was happening before that. And people think differently about work, and it's almost like work and money has lost its value in the workplace. People value other things, and uh, I find it surprising, but economically have the opportunity to make decisions or choices, like, do I want to work? Do I want to work at this place? Or, if they're not going to give me the things that I want and the freedoms that I want, then I can choose other things. So that's really interesting. It does cause, did you find in these businesses many of the people that are running these firms come from and know a traditional workplace, and that, it's like, we have our business, we built our business, we're hiring you to come on in here and do some things for us. And why are you asking questions about that? It's like, this is the job. Did you see pushback or frustration or any fatigue around trying to implement and make these places more accepting of the workforce?
Absolutely. And I've seen that a lot. So the companies I research when I'm talking to them and talking to the leaders are like, we're doing all the things, we're giving them the benefits. I had one CEO of a fast casual restaurant. He said, I'm giving, frontline employees, we're contributing to their 401k. Like I wished that I would have had that back in the day when I was entering my career. And I want to just say two things can be true at the same time.
Mm,
So that is true. I was raised professionally in a day where, you put your head down, you did your work, and that was in exchange of getting a paycheck. On the other hand, when we really think about this, employees now, and if you look at research, 40% of employees, this is research that came out 2 weeks ago, said that they would be willing to take a pay cut to have more flexibility at work.
wow.
I mean, so let's put that in position. So that paycheck that used to be a carrot, people are saying, I'd rather take a pay cut to have some more flexibility. Why are they saying that? People say, well, maybe they just want to work at home. What we're finding out with a lot of workers is that they're actually doing the calculation of how much it costs for them in time and resources to transport to work, to buy lunch at work when they could be at home doing it. So it's not just that people want to work from home. What they're bringing into their calculation is just their lifestyle and how they can manage all of the things. And really, when we look at the workplace right now and the current workforce, we have the sandwich generation. So a lot of people are caring from, young children. I know you have a 9-year-old son. I have a daughter just went to college, but also we have elderly parents. And so that becomes a lot of responsibilities on workers that traditionally we never really talked about in the
hmm
workplace, but it's
Yeah.
becoming more and more present. And so what I say to leaders is we can no longer afford to ignore the lived realities of workers because whether they're telling you or not, they're still dealing with it and they're taking mind share from hiding this that they could be spending on actually thinking about the business. And that just came out with another report from the Harvard Chan School of Public Health. They said 40% of workers are hiding the fact that they actually have doctor's appointments because they're afraid that they might get docked or it may be looked down on. And again, we just don't have the time in a modern workplace to have people that are hiding things that are so important to them and to their health and well-being.
For sure, especially when it gets competitive, right? And people need talented people to come and work for them. They have to change and deal with these things, because if no one was doing it, then this wouldn't even be a conversation. But many are saying this is what we can offer, and pandemic accelerated that because they had to do it by law. And so it is really interesting. And it is, when you think about it, the world, the cost of living, the time. I mean, when I grew up, just to go and get your eyeglasses fixed or dealt with, it takes time, and time is scarce. And so when do people do that? Well, they have to do it within a period of time, whether that's after work but then there's family and dealing with that, and whether it's aging parents. So everyone's kind of dealing with this time constraint. And then the other thought I had is that it would seem too that the world, there used to be always this conversation, this would have been like 15, 20 years ago when I worked in the corporate world, of, we what's expected of us now is 3x and 5x and 10x. And that was like nearly 2 decades ago. So I have to wonder, what's that now? Is it like 100x? So the amount that organizations expect people to do and take on, and the functions, it's not like back in the day in a factory, you put a rivet in and that's your day. I'm just going to do these rivets. And now it's like, well, yeah, could we actually get you to do the rivets and the screw and the door and the handle and the this and the that? It's a lot of things. So time has been kind of crushed and compacted at work. Time is crushed and compacted in life. And so you can just imagine that organizations, they need to have people that can be able to do this in their life. So they better have options for people to be able to manage it in and out of business.
Completely agree. And, I don't want to date myself, but I'm old enough to remember when I had a desktop. And so when I'd leave on a Friday, no one was calling me. There were no emails, right? And now to your point, Michael, we are asking more of workers. And so how do we think about, and I write this in the book at one of the pillars, how do we think about more mutualistic relationships at work? And knowing that in a modern workplace, the work is dynamic. We are going to sometimes need people to work on the weekends, to work after hours. And so if we're asking people to be flexible in that way, for leaders, how can they think about their flexibility in a new way? And to your point also, there are lots of businesses who are doing this. Spotify just took out a huge ad in Times Square, and they said, we support remote work because we hire adults. And so at the end of the day, I just want to say the businesses that we research, they had that perspective that they hire adults, that these adults know their job and they know the task, and they have many different formats of how they do that. There's certain, companies that do, daily stand-ups to make sure that they're aligned, and regular meetings and, project management documents that they can use. But the idea is that we're hiring adults and they're going to let us know what they need to do to manage their schedule, but to also meet the requirements of the job. What was fascinating in looking at some of these companies that did this, their employees actually overachieved. They had higher productivity. And when I talked to the employees on why that was, they were like, well, we want the company to win. We feel like they're investing in us. We want them to stick around. And so what we begin to see, and I write about this in chapter 9 of the book, is this kind of ownership mindset. And it's not that employees have an actual ownership in the company. Some do offer that, but it's a mindset of saying, I feel like very valued by this company and I feel very committed to it succeeding. And so again, looking at how you create these mutualistic relationships so that you can get employees to dig in that way, because when the headwinds are going the wrong direction, you need people to go the extra mile. You've built up this, this credibility as a leader for your team and as an organization where you'll have people dig in and do extraordinary things to make sure that the company is thriving.
I'd love to hear how that looks in a small firm, couple of employees. Like if you have any stories of the smaller firms where they have instituted these kind of philosophies and you can imagine it makes a massive difference regardless of the size of the company. I'd love to bring it home to some of our listeners around how they can take advantage of this. And, when you say hire adults, we also see the other side of the coin where the workplace and the way that the workplace values is there's a lot of non-adults out there as well. And so, it's like, how do companies navigate that? And are they, the ownership philosophy, like having an ownership mindset, even though you don't have ownership, but it's like you own something in terms of, I belong to this. It's almost like morality in a way. It's like I work for them, they help me, and I feel obligated to make sure I'm doing the best for them. That's also, it's almost an art form to create that kind of culture. So, it's weeding out people who don't believe in those sorts of things and won't be likely to act that way in an organization, and then also inspire them to be that way and make sure that the company fits people like that. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this is an example that just came up recently, and I met the owner of a small bookkeeping company called Breakaway Bookkeeping, and she's an independent operator of a franchise out of Atlanta, Victoria Stanton. And one thing that she shared with me, and I'd say she's one of those leaders, when you think that you have a team she has two people, one admin and kind of one assistant that is working on this. And what she says to me is that she doesn't mind where people work at all. That long as that there is communication very clear and that their job is being done, like that's what she prioritizes. And so what she tries to do when she brings anyone on is to make sure that the incentives are aligned, that they understand where the company is, what the goals she has of the company, and how their work can contribute to the goals. And that if they meet their goal, what's the upside potential for them? And that's worked successfully for her. And one thing she shared with me is that even when people have left the organization, they've still been champions of her in the work, right? So still referring business back to her, still referring her to other of their friends and clients. And that's very simple. That doesn't cost very much, but I want to acknowledge it's hard. As entrepreneurs, as small business owners, we wear so many hats. And a lot of times, we take on everything ourselves. I say we put a S on our chest, right? And we say, the buck stops with us. And what I would encourage listeners, especially of small operations, is how can you really bring people in, your team members, into the business? Let them and be fully transparent with the successes, the goals, but also the challenges, and help them be a thought partner with this. Some people will say, well, I've got some employees who just don't care. My counter would be, are those the right people that you need on your team? Yeah, a small business, we can't afford to hire people who don't care about the business and who aren't willing to step into that ownership mindset.
So true. Well, that's lovely. And, that brings it right home with someone that's running a bookkeeping firm. That's who our listener is. And these are things that it's exciting times for small business because, as you said, large organizations might have a tougher time in implementing these kinds of philosophies in their firm, whereas this is where it's at for small businesses. They can dial up freedom and flexibility quite easily in their businesses, and that can appeal to a large percentage of people in the workforce. Being able to basically design a work relationship completely customized for each individual in an organization. And that's worth something. That's currency right there. So maybe today it makes it more accessible to hire somebody where you can give the freedom than if that was not available to a small business.
That's exactly it. In the book I write about this, I have this chapter that's called Reimagining Benefits. And, many times when I talk to employers, and I saw this with the research, they think about engagement as about perks or morale boosters. But like at the end of the day, what we saw in our research is that true engagement comes from employees feeling really valued, heard, and empowered. And one way we can do that is really by deeply understanding what motivates them. And I go back to that example of the fast casual restaurant CEO. What he did once we surveyed the employees to ask them about, why they weren't taking advantage of 401k, what was most important to them. One thing that we learned is that while they thought a 401k was important, that they had more urgent issues today. And so they wanted an emergency cash fund, that if something went wrong, that they could, receive a loan from the business and that they could pay it back through payroll. And we saw other businesses that were offering, loan forgiveness, paying help with student loan payments. And again, not paying everything. We had one small business that was just giving a 10% payment towards a student loan. And the owner, she told me it was like only, $75 a paycheck for most. But what that meant to the employees, when we asked them, they said they felt heard and cared about. And what we saw across all of the companies is that when we saw that type of engagement where workers were actually centered and the benefits were reimagined, there was 81% lower absenteeism and there was a 43% lower turnover. Again, it's what do employees value? And sometimes traditionally we think about how we were raised in the workplace. There were certain things and markers of success. They might not be as relevant today. And so my encouragement to any small business owners to really understand from their employees, what are the barriers to them showing up at work? Is it transportation? Is it about childcare? Is it that they have student loans on their mind? Again, reimagining and saying, with the dollars and budget we have, what are the small things that we can do to signal to someone that we care about them and that we see them and that we're there for them? And all of the companies we looked at, they weren't investing millions in this. They were actually taking funds they were already using, when I go back to the fast casual, and reallocating them in a way that mattered most to the employees. So it's something for us to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of the challenges or obstacles people face doing this, I mean, an example might be someone who takes advantage of the freedom. What have you learned in those situations, and how have people dealt with them?
So it becomes really evident. And these are conversations I had with Spotify and, again, lots of other small business owners, especially when it's small company. When someone's taking advantage, you typically know within a month, if not a week. So I'll give you an example. When I started my first company, one thing I offered was unlimited PTO. And this was fascinating when I offered it. And I had about 8 people that were reporting to me in the firm. There was one case of abuse, but 90% of people didn't abuse it at all. And in fact, I'd say over 90% of the people didn't even take the full PTO I had offered originally. I'd have to push people to take PTO. But when I asked them, why they stayed, with me as an organization, located in New York, when they probably could have went and got, 50% higher salaries, they gave 2 reasons. One was the mission. and they felt like they were being brought into the work. And then two, they talked about the benefits. And they said even though they didn't use them, it gave them peace of mind to know that they were there. The one employee that did abuse the benefits, I will share, that was, we found out within a month that they were abusing the benefits, and had a conversation with them and end up parting ways with that person. But when you think, one person out of 8 or 9 people, that's not a big number. And again, we
For
found out
sure.
within a month. It wasn't a year later. But part of that, and we saw this in our research with companies, small and large, is making sure that you're staying in contact with your people, that you're actually tracking productivity, that you're watching for absenteeism. These things come up and you can spot them right away. But I would push that the companies that we surveyed saw more benefits than they saw kind of negative impact.
Love it. I agree, and I think that's the key thing there is the managing and metrics, and it's always challenging to fit one thing to everyone. Like there's always going to be, regardless of whether you have zero freedom or no benefits, you're still going to have people in that organization that work well in that scenario and don't work well in that scenario. And it's finding people in your business that actually want to buy into what you're doing. And if they're not, then to find new people, that's really it. And so in this day and age, by the sounds of the book that you've written, and it sounds like it's a must read for anyone that's dealing with staff and want to have an organization that is, as you say in the book, the win-win-win. This is the way to go for small, medium-sized businesses, is to try and design a business that people want to be there. They want to take advantage of things that are more valuable to them than cash, and that's a benefit to small business owners, and also the longevity and reducing attrition of good people leaving. Just being able to make sure you have a place that people want to come, the good people want to stay, and that builds consistency and a strong foundation for growth into the future.
Completely agree. And I think for your audience specifically, when I think about my friends in bookkeeping and accounting, they live and die by the numbers. And one challenge I saw with many businesses, they weren't actually tracking these investments, and they weren't really tracking, retention to see what like policies, the impact that they had. And so that's one thing I think your listeners would be really good at thinking about: what are the 3 to 4 people metrics that matter most to their business, and how can they track that to see like how these decisions and changes in leadership and policies and practices, how it can help drive the business. And it was funny because when I spoke to about a third of the businesses, when I asked them how much this turnover cost them, they didn't know.
Mm.
When I asked what would it mean if someone that they hired stayed an extra 3 months, 6 months, 2 years, 3 years, they didn't know. And so there's this concept I bring up in the book. We always talk about lifetime value of a customer, really thinking about lifetime value of an employee. So again, what does that mean? And so if there's small things that you can implement in terms of your practices, or thinking about the benefits or the ways of working, like bringing in, worker voice and letting them actually share ideas on how they think that they could help you grow the business, and tracking what comes out of that. I would gather to say, and we saw this with our research, that when businesses started tracking this, they saw the benefits, but they also saw when things weren't working, so they could have a data-informed decision on what changes that they might need to make.
That's beautiful, and definitely a fit for our audience to manage, measure, and manage those metrics, and that. So, in your book, are there keys to what could you measure? What could you be? What can we implement? How can we measure it and know whether we're being successful?
Absolutely. And in the book, I love this in chapter 10 because I get asked this question a lot. What I outlined was an approach to how you should think about measuring that any business, small or large, can take on. And so when we think about like understanding what measurements would be so most important, small business owners can track employee retention, They can also think about client satisfaction scores. We have to remember that, our employees, be it an assistant that's answering a phone or someone that's in the back office, anyone that is client facing, really recognizing what are our clients saying? What are they reporting back? Which employees are getting the best reviews, and are we tracking that to see who our valuable players are? Also thinking about what's the revenue per employee, and really thinking about what's the efficiency in service delivery. I don't know about you, but I have an executive assistant that I partner with, Meiji, and she, keeps my life in order. But, I am noting every time someone says that they've had a powerful interaction with her. I'm noting it so I can share with her to motivate her, but I'm also tracking so I know that we're doing the right things. Just as we'd be tracking if we receive one of the negative comments, right? And we're thinking, okay, if there's too many, then you've got to go, really flipping that on its head. And what our research showed is that companies that have this high trust and kind of measurement culture, where employees had a say in the decision making, they had 50% higher productivity and they had 40% less burnout. And really thinking about small businesses, again, because we're in such proximity and closeness with our employees, how do we really dig in and build those trusted relationships? Many people think, oh gosh, I just don't have time to that. My push to you is you don't have time not to, especially if you have 2, 3, 4, under 10 employees. We need to really think about how do we get them more deeply invested in driving the business.
Great. This has been absolutely fantastic. Sounds like your book is a winner for any small business, medium-sized business, for our audience, for sure, to pick up and learn how to do it well. Because if you can find staff to run your business and help with your business, and they're good people, you're going to want to keep them. And there's the value of that is almost unmeasurable in terms of how much value good people have and if they stay with you for a long period of time. So please get out there and get this book. And if our listener was, Angela, wanting to get access to this book, what's the best way to do it? And perhaps any resources that you have, is there places they can go to learn more about you, get more resources, or learn about the book?
Yeah, thank you for asking. So they can go to the book site. It's www.readthewinwinworkplace.com. And so going there, the second thing they could do, and I'd love to extend this offer to your listeners, if anyone goes on Instagram and if they send me a message and tag you and your podcast, what I'd love to do is invite them to be part of our exclusive book club. And with that book club, you'll get a resource toolkit that has a lot of the measurement structures. It has some of the case studies, but it also includes a one-to-one session with me where I will talk to them directly about their business and how they can apply this win-win approach.
It's fantastic. I love the idea of putting it on Instagram and tagging me. And I'd love to hear from all of you and see you tagging The Successful Bookkeeper. And it's real simple on Instagram. It's at The Successful Bookkeeper, or it might just be at Successful Bookkeeper. Geez, you'll have to just search that on Instagram. But we'll have those resources as well in the show notes. And this sounds like a real win-win for our customers and also their clients. This is, if you're thinking about a gift for your clients, I know we talk about this all the time. Books are such a wonderful gift to business owners. And, when you think of so many great books out there that you can gift that don't cost a lot of money to you, but may make a massive impact to them and be memorable to them. This is one of those books I can sense would be just a fantastic gift to give to your clients and get this message out to them. And they're dealing with the same struggles. And so this is one that can help them, retain and create a workplace that people just want to stay and do great work.
That's exactly right, Michael. Thank you. Thank you so much. And that's exactly, I was in Grand Rapids, Michigan a couple of weeks ago, and I was talking to a group of small businesses, and that's exactly what I said. For this message, I wanted to get out. It's really about the ROI on investing in people. And again, I think your audience in particular, sharing it not only, with each other, but also with their clients, will have them begin thinking about the ROI of investing in people. And I'd say, maybe even ... investing in their suppliers and partners. And so it really does become that win, win, win.
Beautiful. I totally agree. So get that book and get over there to the Instagram, post it. We'll have the instructions there in the show notes. And it is The Successful Bookkeeper, at The Successful Bookkeeper on Instagram. And I love Instagram. It's one of the tools, one of the only social media tools that I sort of spend any time on. So love to hear from anyone. And really, Dr. Angela Jackson, it has been an absolute, and I love the fact that you're a doctor and you've written this book. We're always so pleased to have such great people on our podcast. I want to thank you for being on the show and your generosity for coming on the show and sharing what you know on such a really valuable, important topic.
Yeah, and congratulations to you again. I'm so inspired by your work, by your years of the podcast and what you've built in terms of your community.
Thank you. Very much appreciated. And I'm sure we'll hear more from you in the future.
You take care. Thank you.
The pleasure has been all ours. And with that, we wrap another episode of the Successful Bookkeeper podcast. To learn more about today's wonderful guest and to get access to all sorts of valuable free business building resources, you can go to thesuccessfulbookkeeper.com. Until next time, goodbye.
You've been listening to The Successful Bookkeeper with Michael Palmer. For more information and to download the resources mentioned in this episode, please visit us at thesuccessfulbookkeeper.com. Thank you for listening.